Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Nnedi. Today I'm going to revisit some of my most anticipated books of 2018 and tell you whether they lived up to my expectations or not. I've been doing this type of video for a while and I have an entire playlist for anticipated releases revisited if you want to see more of this. But today I'm going to be talking about the books that came out in January, February, and March of 2018 and whether they lived up to my expectations or not. I have read everything in this batch except for one. I'm halfway through it and I will definitely finish it. So I have actual opinions this time compared to the last batch of 2017 where I still haven't read a bunch of those books. So let's jump straight into it with the releases from January. The first one is Beneath the Sugar Sky by Seanan McGuire. This is the third novella in her Wayward Children series that began with Every Heart a Doorway. I'm one of those people who loved Every Heart a Doorway. It was definitely one that I felt like personally touched by. The representation in that story was just so good. I compare all the others to that and none of them have quite lived up to Every Heart a Doorway for me, but they're also all of them very different from each other. So basically the entire series is about children who go off to have adventures in portal fantasy worlds where they belong, and then they have to come back to, the human world, and they find that they don't fit in anymore. So they end up at this school for wayward children. In this one, a lot of the children from that school end up going back to fantasy worlds, kind of on a quest to bring one of them back from the dead. And the main place that they go to in this one is like a high nonsense world, which I would not do very well in. Would not suit me, but it was interesting to see, basically the internal logic of a high nonsense world. So this one I quite enjoyed. It's probably my second favorite out of the three that are currently out so far. Then there is Binti, the Night Masquerade by Nnedi Okorafor, which is the concluding novella in the Binti trilogy. And this one I also really enjoyed. I struggled a bit with the second one. There were some things about it that I just didn't like as much, but I feel like the Night Masquerade really brought the entire trilogy together, really coalesced everything excellently, and it really made my opinion of the second one, Binti Home, go up considerably. I would love to reread the trilogy all the way through with all of the parts to see how it works, because this one definitely was very good. And the last book for January is The Graves of Fine and Private Place by Alan Bradley, which is the 9th book in the Flavia de Luce mystery series. The series is about a 12-year-old girl in 1950s England who is very into poisons and investigating murder. I can't say too much about what happens in this book because obviously spoilers for the previous ones, but there's been a lot of development in Flavia's relationships with other characters and in what's been going on with her family and their fortunes. And there were a bunch of things that happened in this book that I feel really start to lay the groundwork for the conclusion and the what's going to happen to Flavia next. This book also has a lot of the Dogger-Flavia dynamic. Dogger is my second favorite character in the series. He's kind of the de Luce's family manservant, and his relationship with this 12-year-old girl is one of the things I've loved the most about this entire series. So it was really great to see a lot more of him and a lot more of him with Flavia in this book. And I'll be sad when the series concludes, probably next year in 2019, but I also really love it when series have definite endings instead of getting dragged out for too long. Moving on to February, the first book is Tempest and Slaughter by Tamora Pierce, the long awaited novel about Numair. So my favorite series by Tamora Pierce is The Immortals Quartet, which is the series where Numair, the main character of this series, is introduced. And I really liked him in that series. So this is the first, and what I think is going to be a trilogy that goes back to explore Numer's history and his time as a student in Carthage at the University of Magic, and how, you know, he became the sorcerer and the mage that he is later on in the world. So the first thing I have to say is that when I heard that this book was going to be split up into a trilogy, I was not happy, because I really like Tamora Pierce's older books that are much slimmer and more streamlined and edited. And my fear always is that when single books get split up into trilogies, it's always trilogies, that they just become too wordy, and that it just gets packed with stuff that really should have been edited out. And I have to say that after I've sat on this book for a while, I think it's kind of going in that direction. I think it could have been a much more streamlined and efficient story if it was one book, or maybe just a duology or something. Despite saying that though, I really enjoyed it. I actually really feel like this book, and actually the series, is kind of fan service in some ways, where Pierce is giving longtime fans all the information they could ever want about Numer. And I'm partly really happy about that, because it's totally what I want. Like, my inner fangirl is so into that. The part of me that really appreciates good, brisk storytelling isn't so happy about that though. So I very much enjoyed the book, and I read it very quickly, and I will so read the next book very quickly as well. But there is a little part of me that wishes that this had just been one book, and she just doesn't write the same kinds of books anymore, and that makes me sad. On the other hand, cannot blame authors for writing differently after decades of experience. They can do what they want at that point, I think. The second thing for February is Into the Fire by Elizabeth Moon, which is the second book in the Vada's Peace series. I do not know how many books there will be in this series. I kind of get the feeling it might just be left at a duology, because where this book ends could really just be the end. It wraps up a bunch of things quite neatly. There could be a third book. There are still some things that could be told in the next story, but if it ended here, that would be okay from a storytelling perspective. I just hope there will be more, because I love this world and I love this character. This world is basically military science fiction, which follows the character of Kailara Vada, who in the very beginning is expelled from military academy and then rises on her own merits and talents to become admiral of her own fleet that she puts together. And there's a lot of political machinations and targeted assaults on her family and her family's business, and a lot of the story is the fallout from that. So I enjoyed this so much, and the main thing that I think makes these books so good for me, and that made Into the Fire so good for me, is that Moon has a lot of characters in her books that are capable. This is just about people who know how to do their jobs and do their jobs well, and I love reading about people who are prepared, and when the sky starts falling, sometimes literally, they know what to do and they do the right thing, and I love it so much. Kai is, at the core, a very practical, honorable person who strives to do the right thing. She has flaws, but the fact that she's, not just looking out for herself, but very much a good leader who looks out for other people, I love it so much. I really, really do. I hope there will be a third book. Semiosis by Sue Burke. This is another science fiction novel that I loved. It's one of my favorite books that I read in 2018. I said I was going to do a separate review on it, and I still haven't done that because I am a bad reviewer sometimes. But this is some alien SF about colonists who go to another planet. They're completely unprepared for the biology and the plant life that they encounter there, and it's about language and communicating with alien species. And at this point, if I want to do a proper review of it, I will have to read it again, which would not be a bad thing. I'm very tempted to sit down and start reading it again now. Anyway, if you have a similar taste to science fiction as me, pick up this book and start reading it right away, because it's really, really good. Next up is a little bit of an oddity for me, and that is Monster Portraits by Del Samatar and Sofia Samatar. I would still basically call this a poetry collection, because even though it's formatted kind of like just like text, like prose, as these little vignettes, to me it reads like poetry, like it is highly poetical language. And even though I have reread parts of this multiple times, I don't completely get it, probably because I'm just not super great at interpreting poetry yet, but this makes me really want to get better at it. I love Samatar's language so much. I think that, and as far as poetry goes, I like her poetry, even if I don't completely understand it. But this is just a little collection that really has drawn me back to it multiple times. There's something very attractive about it, and the illustrations are quite good. Moving on to March, the first book is Typescript of the Second Origin by Manuel de Pedrolo, which is translated into English by Sara Martin. This is a Catalan young adult dystopian novel. So this was written in the 1970s, and it is about an alien invasion of Earth, which they come through with like sound waves, which kill all large mammals, including human beings. And some people survive because they were underwater at the time, and that includes the two characters of the story, which are a teenage girl and a much younger boy. And then they set off to survive and essentially rebuild the human race. And it's interesting that the person in charge, the real architect of this plan, is a young woman who is not held back by ideas about what women should do or what people should or shouldn't do. I would hesitate a little bit to recommend this for younger readers, is that there's essentially implied incest at the end, that the human race won't survive unless incest actually happens. And I have a history of really not liking books that contain incest. So it doesn't actually have it, it's just implied that it's going to happen. And on the other hand, it totally fits with the way the story has gone so far, which is that taboos aren't really taboo anymore when there's nobody around to say that it's a taboo. Like, these people can just create their own way of living and their own morality if they want to. So it's a really interesting book, and I would recommend picking it up, especially if you're really into reading translated science fiction and fantasy and such. Just be aware that there may be some content that is challenging. Next is Imposter Syndrome by Mishell Baker, which is the third book in the Arcadia Project series. I am not done reading this. I'm only about halfway through it as of filming this. I do think it's quite good, but not as good as the first two in the series. I really enjoyed the first two, which are Borderline and Phantom Pains. But I continue to really appreciate the main character, who has borderline personality disorder as well as other disabilities. She is a fascinating character, and the story does so much with her. But once again, I also feel like some of her character development is regressing in this book. She was definitely changing and doing better and doing different things in the previous books, but now it feels like she's sliding back, and that's making me a little bit unhappy. But we'll see what I think when I actually get through the second half. Gods, Monsters, and the Lucky Peach by Kelly Robson. This is still one of my absolute favorite reads of the year, and if you want to know more about it, I did do an entire video review, and it's one of the better videos I've made this year. But yes, I completely loved this. It has so much packed into it, so many different elements, and Robson makes this mashup work so well. And it's also a time travel story that I really enjoyed. I can be a bit hypercritical of time travel sometimes, but I really, really enjoyed this story. And lastly for this batch is Stone Mad by Elizabeth Bear, which is a sequel novella to the novel Karen Memory. And I definitely think that you need to read Karen Memory before reading Stone Mad because that just lays a lot of groundwork, which is called back to. So this is about Karen, a former prostitute, who is now living with her girlfriend Priya. They are out treating themselves to dinner in a hotel restaurant in this kind of steampunk Western world, and strange things start happening, and Karen stays behind to discover what is going on as like the supernatural creature may attempt to bring the building down around them. I liked it because I really enjoyed the world, I love the characters, but what I remember the most about this, unfortunately, is that parts of the plot seemed mistimed. But despite that, I really liked being back in the world, and I would really enjoy seeing more novellas set in this world. I think that would be a perfect length to tell more stories like this. And that is it for this batch of 2018 releases. Some of these books didn't turn out to be quite what I had expected, but all of them I think ended up being very, very good. And it seems to me like 2018 got off with a very strong start, at least for me and the books that I chose to read. So let me know if you have read any of these and what your thoughts were on them. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon, and until then, bye.